Hello, bros. We're back with The Sorcerer's Apprentice by Heinz Ewers. Translated by Ludwig Levison. Turn on the light. There we go. We're on chapter 9er. I believe 9er. Yep, chapter 9. Let's get into it. I haven't read in a couple days because these chapters are so long and I'm working. So let's go on with it. Chapter 9. In Manchem Munster Nestel die. You read that. I can't read German, so if you know how to read that, you can. And there's the demon. The cool sea wind blew in their faces. Teresa staggered like a drunken man who emerges. Let me unplug this phone. The cool sea wind blew in their faces. Teresa staggered like a drunken man who emerges from a damp cellar into the street. And only at the moment when the fresh air reaches him becomes conscious of his intoxication. He almost had to carry her, and with difficulty helped her move her feet. They went the shortest way through the village. In vain he sought for a bench on which she might rest. When they passed the church, it occurred to him that one might well rest there. He turned the knob of the door, which was not locked. They entered. The moonlight fell through the long panes. There were no benches anywhere, only low stools at the sides. He led her to the altar and set her down on one of the steps. He wanted to cool her hot forehead, went to the holy water, Ewers, and dipped his handkerchief into it. But the water was stagnant and malodorous. He returned to the altar, sat down next to her, and gently stroked her temples and her hands. Slowly she became calmer. For a long time they sat silently beside each other. He expected her to arise and pray. Above the altar hung the picture of the Madonna. She bore the child in her arms, and 7 silver swords pierced her heart. At her feet lay many fresh roses, and he knew that Teresa had brought them as an offering, but the girl did not even look up. She seemed not even to be conscious that she was in the church. Frank Braun thought, poor Madonna, the prophet has dethroned you. He felt a profound satisfaction. All this was his work. The marionettes danced and gave the performance which he had inspired in them. The rehearsal had been held and had gone well. He was a good stage manager and meant to produce his piece so that it would attract attention on the mad stage of the world's history. His head was a good property room. All the masquerades of history lay neatly piled up there, well arranged, according to peoples and centuries. The roles were distributed now, and he would dress his dolls gaily and wildly for such a carnival as the world had ever seen, or never seen. And Teresa was to have the star part despite the prophet. Why shouldn't he charge an entrance fee? Wasn't the business of a theatrical manager as good as any other? This was a good job, and it could bring in many, many millions. Ah, wasn't Val de Scodra as beautiful a name as Delphi had been, and Cavalier, and Lords, and Valli de Pompeii. Bartolo Longo was even today the richest man in Italy, and yet his wretched mother of God of Pompeii hadn't been worth 3 francs when he bought her. But he was beginning here with the whole troupe of miracle performers, and had talents of the first order in this company. Frank Braun reflected, one would have to buy Val de Scodra, all the houses and all the land. That could be done quickly enough and would cost but a few 100,000, and then 3 times as much for advertising. He would need scarcely a million. That would suffice absolutely for the beginning. To be sure, he didn't have the million, but he had friends who were undoubtedly intelligent enough to give him credit in this matter. He would form a company with limited liability and with a beautiful title, the Sacred Heart of Jesus Company Limited. And this much was certain, he would have only Jews as stockholders. In this Christian company, capable people, good businessmen. Then would come the various foundations, a dozen large hotels to start with, halfway up the slope in a semicircle around the lake, 8 for Germans, 2 for Englishmen, 1 for Italians, and 1 for Slavs. Ought there to be 1 for Frenchmen? Oh no, that would scarcely pay. The French are heathens and wouldn't come anyhow. And a series of gigantic inns for the pilgrims, and a basilica compared to which Bartolo Longo's would sink into insignificance. Also, sanatoria and charming little chalets. Hello, bros. And it's not the Bible. Don't ask again. You will be banished to purgatory. Round about the lake, he would have a gallery carved into the rock, and thus create a circular path. Everywhere bathing machines would be anchored, and the lake itself would be the great tub and fountain of health for all ills. As for the miracles, he had no fear at all. He had one that hundreds of people had seen with their own eyes. How many miracles a year did Lourdes have? And even the absurd faker of Valle di Pompeii succeeded in having quite a good record. Where 500 people believed, 50 millions would do so too, and so he would have his weekly miracle. From the start, the industry must be organized. There was the water of the lake, which one could export in huge quantities. It would outsell its competitors, the water of Jordan and Eau de Lourdes, by tens of thousands. One could plant sacred olive trees around the basilica, and every leaf would sell for a crown. The little souvenirs, the rosaries, and all the cheap trash for the pilgrims would have to be manufactured on the spot. Near the road, half an hour from the village, there was a flat space as well as a torrent. So here was the logical spot for the factory, near water power. The master mechanic would have to be brought from Saxony. The Fiave River would furnish electric light for the whole settlement. It had power enough for 10 valleys like Skodra. The passenger traffic to the city would be taken care of by hourly motor cars. The pilgrims, to be sure, must come on foot. That would serve to heighten the suspense and would be very fruitful in the matter of miracles. It's a book. Read the title of the broadcast. The takings would be enormous. The stranger would not go a step without opening his purse. There would be a fee for general cure and a fixed price for each bath. Devotional leaflets and souvenirs for sale at every house. People would not live for nothing in this holy city which was to open the way to heaven. But of course, one would give the money's worth. Enormous processions calculated to hit the vulgar taste. The brotherhoods of Seville, newly decked out in the style of Barnum and Bailey. Passion plays of sophisticated silliness, nicely adapted to produce copious action of the lachrymal glands. Plays of flagellance which would make howling dervishes look like nothing at all. Choirs of castrates, so charming that all hearts would swell in godly delight. And a gambling hall, why not that too? Wasn't the purpose an exceedingly holy one? And would the authorities of this pious country, considering the purpose, refuse their permission, provided they receive a decent percentage? Ah, they would grasp the opportunity with both hands. The chief rolls, to be sure, were already distributed. There was Pietro, the prophet, the greatest attraction, who was alone worth the price of entrance, and the tailor Ranchi, who would have to be Enoch, for where Elijah is, Enoch must not be lacking. Then there was Girolamo Scuro, the farmhand, who carried all possible piety in his pumpkin-like goiter, and Matilda Veneer, with those fiery eyes of hers which fairly threw out sparks of fanatical faith. There was Sibylla Madruzzo. How admirable she had been in Innsbruck Hospital. One would have to send there for her medical history, as well as to procure the written testimony of the pastor of Samigo and the authorities. He would have a little book printed with a beautiful title, Paralyzed for 30 Years, or Sibylla Madruzzo, cured by the miracle of Val di Scodra. Her picture would appear on the front cover and on the back cover, before and after recovery, just as you advertise a hair restorer. The little books would sell for a crown apiece, and one would sell hundreds of thousands. Young Ulpo, too, would develop by and by, and one scarcely knew how many talents were asleep among the God fearing crowd in the mountain village. And this would not be, of course, the only source of successors. The crowds of pilgrims would furnish him with ever new surprises. What material? Pious persons and hysterical ones, ardent believers, epileptics, spiritualists, idiots. You, the idiot. Um, now I lost my spot. Fanatics, nervous patients, mystics, neurasthenics. What the hell is neurasthenics? A treasury of materials for the dough that he wanted to knead. All the little fishes would jump of their own accord into the great kettle of all Discodra, stew in incense and in holy wine, in praying and singing and fasting and scourging. All their poor senses would be stung and stimulated until the last vestige of reason was drained from their marrow. What? Every week? He would have his miracle every day, and his village would become the greatest madhouse in the whole world. But Teresa remained his trump card. She must become a saint, a prophetess, compared to whom the Delphic priestess would hide in shame in the last crevice of her Pythian cave. All the pious fraud of history would have to drip from her shining teeth, and her blue eyes were to be the snares to catch the simple-minded of all the continents. But he was to be the great ruler over all the madness of the world. All as had been done with tobacco or matches or alcohol, so he would form a monopoly of madness. Here, to be sure, was virgin soil, scarcely trodden by mystical highwaymen who wandered about barefoot and blind. He had all the knowledge and all the cleverness of his age, and he knew this twilight land thoroughly from end to end. He alone could bring its immeasurable treasures to the light. Ah, the world was beautiful, and the greatest charlatan was its king. Long live King Charlatan, he cried. His voice resounded in its echoing joy through the empty church. Teresa started. What is that? She asked. He remembered. Oh, yes. They were still sitting at the foot of the altar. Do you feel better? He asked. Shall we go? She nodded and got up. Everything's all right again. His eyes fell on the red lamp which was suspended from a buttress under the picture of St. Francis. Do you supply it with fresh oil? He asked. Yes, she said. He is my patron saint. It was a wretched, tattered chromo, the crowned Madonna with the child apparent to St. Francis in vision, and blessed him with the stigmata of the Redeemer. In order to show all this, the position of the saint was a highly complicated one, a curious mixture of standing, falling, and floating. He bore the stigmata on both his hands and his feet, and a hole was cut into his brown Franciscan robe in order that one might also see the scar in his side. So he is your patron saint, he repeated thoughtfully. He who bears the stigmata. He looked at her for a moment, and in that moment caught a vision of the role she was to play in his great spectacle. An arrogant wantonness and a great desire came over him. Swiftly he approached the picture. Dear Saint Francis, he said, I thank you with all my heart for the excellent notion which you have just given me. You are really an excellent saint who returns good for evil. We are old acquaintances, you and we're neighbors in my native city on the Rhine. The garden of your cloister bounds my mother's garden there, and you know well how wicked we boys always were to you, and what mischief we perpetrated against the pious fathers of your order. We invented long confessions and told the good fathers lengthy falsehoods of murder and sudden death. We used to wash our hands in your consecrated water, or put toads and fat leeches into it. And when Father Cyprian and Father Barnabas and the others walked in the garden, their rosaries in their hands, we howled and shouted and pelted them with potatoes. But when they were not there, we stole their cherries and apples and grapes, and never, I believe, did anything ever ripen in that beautiful garden. They scolded and were enraged and ran after us, but one can run but very badly in the brown robe of your order, dear Francis of Assisi. Ah, never did fruit taste like that which I stole from your garden. But now, I assure you, I will never do it again. Nevermore, I can promise that. In gratitude for your bearing me no grudges and for telling me now what I am to do with this girl who stands under your protection. He spoke very honestly and with much unction, and the girl did not notice how merrily the irony flickered under his words. What did he tell you? She asked. Something that concerns you, he answered. I'll tell you about it by and by. He is a kind saint, and I was always so wicked to him. He went up to the lamp and blew out the light. She was frightened. What are you doing? But he was serious. He must sleep. Don't you believe that he ever gets tired? If the light burns there continually. He took her arm and led her out of the church, but she stopped at the door. No, she said firmly, a saint does not get tired, and this is only his image, and the perpetual lamp burns in his honor. Please let me light it again. He laughed. I didn't know you were so enlightened. He gave her matches, and she ran back and ignited the wick again. Then she returned. Why didn't you put fresh water into the holy water basin? But she replied, who is there to bless it? They went through the door and closed it. The street was silent and deserted, but still there resounded from the American's barn a confused noise of music and singing. When they stepped into the house, he asked, do you know the life of the saint whose name you bear? She shook her head. Then I'll tell you about it, he continued. They mounted the stairs. Go into your room, he said. Undress yourself and go to bed. I'll be with you in a moment. He went into his bedroom, undressed and bathed, and put on his pajamas. Then he knelt before the heavy book trunk, opened it, and hunted around in it. At last he found what he was looking for, a stout volume and a couple of pamphlets. He opened them, turned the pages, and nodded with satisfaction. Then he went to her. Her room was dark. You have no lights, he asked. He brought in his lamp, drew up a chair, and set the lamp on it. Then he sat down near her on the bed. She noticed the books and sighed. She closed her eyes and stretched out her arms towards him. Do come, she whispered. I'm so tired. Don't you want to hear what I'm going to tell you? He asked. She nodded obediently. Of course, go on. And she took the stout volume and spelt out the title curiously. Acta Sanctorum. Are you going to read to me out of that? Yes, he said. I'm going to tell you the story of Saint Teresa, whose name you bear. I will tell you of her and of other pious women. She caressed his hands. Wouldn't you rather sing? He said, no, I will not sing. No one shall sing anything in Val d'Escodra lest it be the songs of the American. He took one of the little pamphlets. Have you ever heard of Louise Lateau? No, she answered. She sighed. She still resisted whenever he wanted to discuss sacred things. But he would not let her off. Surely you know the picture of St. Francis very well, he continued. Do you know what it represents? That moment in the life of the holy man in which the Mother of God appears to him, and in which he receives the stigmata of our Lord. Yes, I know, said the girl. Very well, this wonderful grace of the Lord was vouchsafed not to him only, but to many other faithful hearts, especially to pious women. The stigmata were borne by Maria of Morel and Katerina Emmerich of Dolman. The last, however, whom the Redeemer's hand marked with the scars of his wounds, was the Virgin, Louise Lateau, from Bois de Haine, I don't know how to say it, in Flanders. In a soft, ingratiating voice, he told his stories. Only from time to time did he glance at the book. He held her hand and noted that her resistance gradually disappeared. She listened, and very slowly that calm, mystical mood arose in her which made her tremble in strange raptures whenever she sat at her confessor's feet. Here was this sweet musical mist which she had not breathed in so long. He told her of Jean de Angus, of Sister Catry, and of Marguerite Alacoque, who had founded the adoration of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. He told her that the latter had been healed by a miracle, even as Sibylla Madruzo had been. That her life had been richly blessed with pious visions, as was that of Saint Teresa, to whom all the seven heavens had been opened, even on earth. What is a vision? Asked the girl softly. He answered, I cannot tell you in my own words, which you would not understand after all. I'll read to you the words of that saint whose name you bear. There comes about a sleep of all the spiritual powers which are neither wholly lost nor yet retain a consciousness of their activity. Joyful excitement, sweetness, and rapture then grasp the soul, but it cannot yet fare farther, and does not know how it is to return. The hell was that? It would gladly enjoy that great splendor. It is like a dying man into whose hand one has already placed the taper, and to whom little is lacking to die the death he longs for. It feels in his death struggle the highest rapture which one can express. It seems to me like an almost complete dying to all the things of the world, and the soul does not know whether it is to speak now or be silent, whether it is to laugh or to cry. It is a madness full of glory, a divine folly, and for the soul a condition of the most magical delight. He interrupted himself. Do you understand what the saint says, Teresa? Can you imagine this condition? Her eyes closed, but she opened them slowly and looked at him. Yes, she whispered. It is as when I am lying in your arms. Gently he caressed her cheek. And yet, Teresa, he continued, all this is but the beginning. This delight of the soul in lying as a bride in the arms of Christ is far greater than anything man has to give. And what does one see? She asked. He said, oh, it is so difficult to say. Listen to what Anna Katerina Emmerich, who also bore the scars of the Lamb, said in this matter. He took another one of the pamphlets, turned the pages, and read, I have seen an infinity of things which are expressed in words, and indeed how is one to express by word of mouth what has been seen otherwise than by the bodily eyes? I see this not with my eyes, but it seems to me rather as though I saw it with my heart here in the middle of my breast, and indeed it causes me pain in that place. Do you understand, Teresa, that one can see with the heart and not with the eyes? She said softly, oh yes, I understand it very well. When I lie quietly at night and everything is dark, nevertheless I see you. I feel that you are here, and that you are alive in my breast. Sometimes it seems to me as though two hearts were beating here. His glance was almost reproachful. Must you always be thinking of me, Teresa? The women of whom I am telling you thought of no man and only of God. They were saints, she objected shyly, and has a point there. The Holy Spirit dwelt in them. And how do you know, he cried, that he does not desire to dwell in you? Do you believe that God would ask you for permission? This is what St. Teresa says. God comes when he wills, openly and without interference. Even though we oppose ourselves, he lays hold upon our spirit as a giant might grasp a wisp of straw. Our opposition does not help at all. Who could believe that God, when once he wills, will wait until the puffed up worm flies? Let me read that again. Who could believe that God, when once he wills, will wait until the puffed up worm flies of its own accord? She was frightened, and there was fear in her voice. I am full of sins, she whispered. Do you believe that? He might come to me in spite of that. He said seriously, yes, I believe that. Did not God breathe the soul of Elijah into that of Pietro Nascler? The book Jalkuth Rubeni teaches us that the souls of 974 generations went into Laban's sheep. From thence they returned into the bodies of men, for which reason Israel was so fruitful in Egypt, and the Lord's favor rests visibly upon Val d'Escodra. Who knows whether your saint many not become alive? I think it means may not become alive again in you. The image of the assembly awakened in her again. All peace forsook her. She trembled. She saw again those wild, half-naked people with their whips and rods. She saw again the bloody wounds in the red glare of the pitch torches. But she also saw Sibylla Madruzo lift herself slowly up and grow and stand, healed through an awe inspiring miracle, taller than any man. Tell me more, she begged quickly. Tell me about those pious women. He said, the Savior once came to St. Catherine of Siena and said, I will fill your life with such surprising miracles that ignorant people and those bound by the bonds of flesh will refuse to believe them. I will adorn your soul with such a fullness of grace that even your body will feel the effects thereof and continue to live, only in quite an extraordinary way. And for many years until her death, the saint took neither food nor drink. She was nourished by the radiance of the Redeemer alone. So too it was with Louise Lateau. She received only the Holy Communion and refused all earthly food. Every Friday her sacred wounds bled round about her forehead, on her left side, and on her hands and feet. Then she saw the Lord. Thus she relates it to us. I am seized in those moments by so powerful a feeling of the presence of God that I do not know where to turn. I see him in such greatness and myself in such littleness that I do not know where to hide. And I see a bright light, but it is no light that touches the eyes of the body, but touches the soul in the manner of lightning. It is a light, the end of which one does not see. It shows me the greatness of God and my own nothingness. I am then in another world. The same light which separates me from all external things unites me to God without any intervening medium. She saw the Redeemer, his garments, his wounds, his crown of thorns, and the cross. She saw him kneel and fall. She saw how the men at arms nailed him to the rood. And she suffered with him and fought with him the fight of death. Then, however, when his last sigh had fled, she saw the clouds part and saw how in a sea of heavenly light the Father received his Son into his arms. Teresa's eyes gleamed. It must be glorious, she said. He nodded. It is the highest bliss that man can experience, he continued, and the strangest thing is that then the most frightful suffering is transformed into the highest rapture. If you understand that, you will begin to understand why the scourges of Pietro and the rest do not bring pain, but a rapture to them. You know them all very well, and you can easily understand that they would never grasp the thorns of their own accord if the Lord did not impel them. Here, read what the mother of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, Maria Marguerite Alacoque, has to say concerning the rapture of pain. He sought the book and handed it to her. She took it and read softly. It is quite certain that without the cross and the holy sacrament I could not live nor bear the length of my banishment in this vale of tears. I have never desired an alleviation of my sufferings. The more oppressed my body was by them, the more my spirit rejoiced, and the more freedom it enjoyed to unite itself with my suffering Savior. The Lord of my soul never withdrew from his unworthy sacrifice, of whose weakness and inability he was well aware. At times he said to me, I show you much honor, my dear daughter, by using such noble means for your crucifixion. My eternal Father delivered me into the hands of hangmen, that they might crucify me, and I use for you, for this purpose, priests consecrated to my service. I want you to bring to me for your redemption all that you will suffer. Thus spoke the Lord. But I now speak of the bliss of suffering with such satisfaction that it seems to me as though I could write books full without satisfying my desire. He took the book away from her. It is thus, do you see, that the highest happiness grows out of suffering. How that comes to be, no one can say, but this happiness, which is a union with God, rises far above all human rapture and blessedness. Everyone who learns how to experience this rapture, he is in God and is God himself. When the pious Sister Catri thus became God, she reached the point at which she forgot everything finite and was lifted so far above herself and all created things that she lay still for 3 days and was held to be dead. Then only did she come to herself and say, how wretched I am to be here again. But what she felt, she was able to communicate to no man. Would you like to experience such happiness, Teresa? She sighed again. I am so full of sins. Then he interrupted her. There is but one sin in the eyes of God? She asked, but one? And what is that? Not to be in God. That is the one great sin. If you are in God, as Saint Teresa was, and Caterina, and Louise, and Marguerite, and Catri, and so many other pious women, then you are free from all sin for a short period. But when it is over again, when you wander on earth again as a human being, then this is the great sin, and it is not well to distinguish between one sin and another, which may be greater or smaller. They all vanish in the mighty sea of the one great sin of not being in God, but you will not understand it and can come to no recognition of it if God's hand does not someday snatch you away from this earth in the storm of his fire and lift you high into his glory. The girl said dreamily, I don't understand it, but I really believe that I could come to feel it. He took her hand and caressed it. It is so difficult to speak, he said. Your language is not my language, and your words are not my words. He interrupted himself. Oh no, Teresa, I don't mean the German language, but you see, the world in which you live has a different language from that whence I come. Words are the same everywhere, but we put another meaning into these words than you do. For that reason, I took these books and read to you what these women have said. For they speak the language of your church, which has sounded in your ear, too, all your life long. In this way I thought you might perhaps understand it. She lifted her arms and wound them about his neck. Beloved, she said, speak in your own language, even if I understand nothing. Yet I feel it and grasp it ardently in my heart. Beloved, I know that you live deep in me. He sat in silence and stared, lost in dreams, into space. Then he began, One who was my ancestor sought greatly after the highest happiness. He built in his heart a magnificent temple to the Godhead, but he forgot that one dare never neglect the devil, who is a part of the eternal God. And the devil revenged himself and shattered the young body of the poor visionary, and delivered his beautiful soul to the jeering of the street boys. Listen, Teresa, to what he sang. His voice trembled, and he was certain that his soul clothed itself in the exquisite hymn of Novalis. Fervently he spoke. Few live who know the deep secret of love, though knowing insatiableness and eternal thirst, the Holy Supper's divine significance is to their earthly minds mysterious. But whoever from hot beloved lips drew the deep breath of life, and to whom sacred glow in trembling waves melted the heart, whose eyes were opened, so that he measured once the immeasurable depths of heaven, he will feed of his body and drink draughts of his blood eternally. Who has the earthly body's high riddled guessed, and who may say he understands the blood? All bodily vesture is one body. In heavenly blood floats the blessed pair. Oh, that the eternal sea were once incarnadined, that the hard rock would melt once into flagrant flesh. Never that sweet meal ends, never will love be sated. Who cannot deeply enough have for his own his beloved? By ever more delicate lips is turned to spirit the food, closer and nearer. More ardent the desire thrills in the soul, thirstier and hungrier grows the heart. Thus endures love's delight throughout eternity. Ah, had the sober of soul tasted of this but once, they would all abandon all and take their they would abandon all and take their seats at the table of yearning which never grows bare. They would recognize love's most infinite fullness, praising the mystical food of flesh and blood. He spoke, and yet it was a sweet singing. Silent words came from his lips, but they dropped into her hands like the fragrance of warm linden blossoms, and her bosom heaved, and her eyes saw a silver light. What do you feel? He asked. Then she said softly, I feel as if my soul were about to flee to the arms of the bridegroom. He nodded. Yes, that may well be. He kissed her eyes quickly and said, So now you may sleep. Swiftly he grasped her left hand and with his fingers stroked gently the hypnotically sensitive spot on the cushion of her thumb. She rested for several seconds, then she fell asleep. Quickly, he closed her eyelids. He put the books away. He sat on her bed, motionless, reflecting and dreaming. Yes, it will work, he cried aloud. It must work. Quickly, he bent over her and lifted her head. He pushed pillows under it so that she might lie high. Then he addressed her. Do you hear me, Teresa? She murmured, yes. He put his mouth close to her ear. He spoke in whispers, but swiftly and commandingly. Often he repeated his sentences, speaking them over again, more slowly and with more decision. Then again he would interrupt himself. Do you hear me? He would ask, or you will do this. And always came the well-trained, obedient yes. Sometimes her lips smiled, then again they were distorted in fear and horror. But her assent received with equal gratitude and humility, raptures and sorrows for all eternity. He stopped and bethought himself, then bent over her again to add some detail, and at the close he repeated once more briefly and incisely all his commands. Then he said, now I shall awaken you, but you will be very tired, very tired. You will be tired, very tired. Your eyes will fall shut, and you will go to sleep at once. There's the illustration of it. Now you may sleep. He blew lightly upon her face, and her eyelids opened. She looked at him, and with a smile stretched out her hands toward him. He was sure that she knew nothing of all that he had just said to her. Her half-raised arms fell back. Her eyes closed. She slept. He put the lamp away and blew it out. Slowly he went to the door, and vehemently, against his will, the words came from his lips. Now it is working on. He went to his room and went to bed. I am a victor, he said. I am a king. I am a god. Something laughed, but he would not give ear. He spoke defiantly and proudly. I am a god. I create. I am creating a great and strange world. He felt that something was rustling and whispering, somewhere under the bed, in the corner, or in his brain, and he cried in a loud voice, drive the rats away. I am inviolable. He did not want to think any longer. Not then. He wanted to sleep at once, at that very moment. He wanted to sleep. He closed his eyes and clenched his teeth. He desired to sleep. Hence, he fell asleep. Is that books? Yeah, that's the books. 100 rats crept out of his skull. Okay. The curtain was raised, and the stage showed the hall of the prophet. They all appeared, Pietro and Sibylla, Ronchi, Ulpo, and Matilda Vernier. Where was Teresa? He did not see her. Girolamo Scuro approached from behind, a single huge blood-red goiter, like a balloon filled with blood. Pietro Nascler was a black, long-haired monkey. His lower jaw protruded far, and his arms touched the ground with their fingers. Sibylla Madruza was curved like a round wheel. Her teeth bit her toes, and she rolled around. The tailor, thin as a thread, drove her with his whip. They all took their stations and waited for their cue, for he sat below them in the prompter's box, and this box was the roof of his own skull. 100 rats sprang out of his skull. They ran across the stage, then the people vanished, and the rats rustled and whispered and smiled. They smiled. They wanted to tell him something. But then they sat up on their haunches, and each took its long tail between its teeth and bit it off, and the tails turned into 100 long, naked worms, which crept toward him. Wherever they crept, they left a trail of soft, bright slime, and the whole floor gleamed with this slime. But he knew that the worms were creeping up to him, closer and closer. They would creep into his mouth and ears, into his eyes and nostrils. 100 long, naked, slimy worms. He screamed. When he awoke, his temples burned and their pulses hammered on his brain. The covers lay on the floor, and the sea breezes soon cooled the hot sweat of fear that broke out of every pore. His teeth chattered. He shook with chills, took up the covers, and wrapped himself up close. I am sick, he murmured, and this is turning into a fever. He scolded himself. How stupid it had been to sit for hours on the girl's bed, clad only in his thin silk pajamas. Why had he done that? Now he would be unable to sleep. They came, more and more of them, rats, worms, thoughts. There was no hole in which he could hide. He was naked and bare, and all his faith had been shattered into fragments. Without that faith, he was a beggar, and his kingdom went up in smoke. He knew so well now he was no miracle worker. He was only a sorcerer, and a poor one at that, he thought. A miracle is a legitimate sorcery induced by heavenly powers. Pietro believes in heaven, and so he is a miracle worker. But magic is an illegitimate miracle brought about by the powers of the abyss. And this abyss is the brain of man. He was a practitioner of this black art and would never learn the white art, which he despised and envied at the same time, for it alone held happiness in its faith. He knew well that there was no limits to the power of his spirit. Man was the master of creation, and so creation had to feel his influence. The spirit blew whither he would have it blow, and there was no separation between spirit and nature. There was but one, a dreadful wall that surrounded all happiness, and he who had once left its narrow confines could never return again, but stumbled about wretchedly in the mighty nothingness, and found no firm ground on which to set his foot. It was easy to pass out from among the immovable stone blocks of faith, but there was no short way of return. Today, to be sure, he had thought that the girl's hand might lead him. If he believed in himself, then he was a god, and the world was his, and he had believed in himself in those hours. Now it was at an end. He thought over all that had happened. They had been in the American's barn. Mr. Peter had done everything that he had suggested, and the success had been great and proved that the dolls would dance, and that he was a good and clever stage manager. Pietro had wrestled with the Lord as Jacob with the angel. I will not let thee go until thou bless me. And he had forced the Lord to bless him, and to change the wine in his hand to blood, and by his blow to heal the paralyzed Sibylla. All saw it, and all believed it. Why was he alone not permitted to believe? Why did he have to know that the wrestling with the angel was but a beautiful phrase of the Orient, its meaning simply to have convulsions, and that the author of the Pentateuch, never seen that word before, had merely meant to say that poor Jacob was an epileptic? Was it not much more beautiful to let him struggle with the angel of the Lord, as all the Christian donkeys did? All the people of Val d'Escodra believed Pietro's drink to be blood. Why was his own tongue forced to perceive that it was good, clear wine? They all took the healing of Sibylla Medruzzo to be a true miracle. Why could he alone not see anything in it? Why did he alone have to be acquainted with 100 such healings and know how easily they were to be explained? The grave of St. Francis of Paris alone produced dozens of such cures. Anne Maria Corono was so thoroughly twisted and lamed by rheumatism that all physicians had given her up as incurable, yet she carried away her crutches from that grave across her shoulders. Mademoiselle de Coron suffered for 12 years with a cancer in the breast and in the leg, and the holy grave of Saint Medard healed her in a moment. Don Alfonso de Palacoy was incurably blind in both eyes, but the dead Saint Francis made him to see in a second, and so things had gone on for a dozen years. The holy coat of Treves caused the Baroness von Drost-Vickering to throw away her crutches and dance. Lords and Knock, Cavalier, and Val de Pompeii competed in white magic. To be sure, their miracles grew less, fewer, and ever fewer in this age, and now black magic took its turn, and Apollonius of Tyana became a close competitor of the Nazarene. All the jests that the Egyptian magicians at Pharaoh's throne produced, for the belief of Moses, any traveler could have performed for him daily on the fish market of Cairo or the fair at Tanta. The dervishes could lure snakes out of all corners, could make them as stiff as the staff of Aaron, and walk about with them. The begging monks plunged swords into their bodies, drove long nails deep into their flesh, held their arms in the fire, devoured glowing coals, and thrust iron thorns an inch deep into their eyes. The soothsayers of Altrangi, Alt, Altrangi became clairvoyant, I guess it's going to say, clairvoyant over a cup or over a drop of blue ink, and showed therein to the beholder clear images of the persons he despised to see. The Indian yogis lay in the earth in death-like sleep for 60 days. The priests of Alvinthra caused blood to be spewed out of the air, and the Balgogs of Anan were like Mephistopheles, lords of the mighty armies of fleas and bedbugs and lice. The Isidra magicians of the Parsees wrote the seal of Solomon, the 7 Kabbalistic words on the palm of the left hand, and the names of 4 archangels on an egg. Then they laid the egg on their hand, muttered their incantation, and caused it to stand up, or hung it, like a ring to their ears. The magicians of the Afghans caught their divas in the air, just as the yellow men of Thebes and Luxor compelled the spirits of the dead, and the monks of Yemen floated about in their temples and laughed all the laws of gravity to scorn. They were all black magicians. Their miracles crept out of their brains. They were mere men, and each master taught his pupil, but they could be happy, for they had something in which they believed, the power of their secrets. But he had nothing. He knew many secrets, but since he knew them, he also knew how pitiable was the great magnificence of miracles, and he knew very well that it was far more difficult to manage a motor car than to accomplish all the miracles in the world. His dream now filled him with disgust. Valdiscodra, this great giant of all the fools on earth, whose king he was, this tremendous hoax which was to throw billions at his feet. He realized that he must be a deserter from this camp as he had been from every other. Now it is working, he had said. No, it was not to continue to work. He would not even be able to laugh. He would remain as empty as he was, and even if the whole world rode along in this witch's Sabbath of madness, yet his own life would remain without inner content, for he knew that it was all but an empty and noisome bubble. He thought of Teresa. Now she lay and slept a dreamless sleep, but tomorrow that would come to pass which he had commanded. She would become one who bears the stigmata, another saint added to the hundreds of them. What was there remarkable about that? Weren't there enough of that kind? And was it something so very, very extraordinary that he had made her? Through his post-hypnotic suggestion, the joke wasn't even new. If it had not been performed in public, yet it had been performed in the medical laboratory. Nancy and the Salpetriere knew it well and had observed many transsudations of blood among hysterical patients. Pshaw! He might just as well have used a little iron oxide and sulfur cyanate of potassium to produce the bloody scars. He jumped up and went over to her room. He sat down on her bed and listened to her calm, quiet breathing. Then he shook her violently. She started up in fear. Teresa, he cried. Yes, she answered drowsily. Yes, what am I to do? Teresa, you are not to do what I told you. Nothing is to happen of all that. Nothing, do you hear? She sat up and rubbed the sleep from her eyes. What am I not to do? She asked, astonished. He repeated, You must not. But he stopped the sentence abruptly. He had forgotten that she was awake. Quickly, he took her hand and pressed violently the hypnotically sensitive spot. She fell back at once, and he repeated to her what he had just said, and he commanded that never again, whether in waking or in sleeping, was the thought of that which he had commanded to emerge in her consciousness. It was to be extinguished and driven forth forever. He spoke swiftly and waited for no answer. He breathed almost with relief. Then quickly he awakened her, let her lie there, and went back into his own room. The corners of his mouth drooped bitterly. He thought, now the priest will say that I have done a good action, but my virtues are my worst sin, and my greatest sins were always virtues. Ah, if but if I if I but knew the difference between them. And he was overtaken by an infinite pity for himself. And there he is, the devil, and some little dude with a scythe. All right, bruvs, that's all. That's all for that chapter. Chapter 10 awaits.